Okay, so I'm pleased to announce our next speaker who's up tonight. This is Tom Lally, who is the senior scientist with land restoration with Healthy Land and Water. Thank you, Tom.
Looks like most of you stuck around after the scones, so that means that you're committed, which is good. Alrighty, folks. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the koala habitat projects that Healthy Land and Water has been running for the past few years. And I guess the aim of those projects has been achieving landscape scale koala habitat restoration across southeast Queensland, and the Scenic Rim has to date played a very big role in that. So to start off, I'm going to throw a bit of technical info and a bit of science at you. So we were fortunate enough to be engaged by the federal government to deliver some funding for koala habitat works. And the first step for that was identifying where to work. Obviously, we have the state government koala mapping that you've heard a little bit about tonight, and you might have heard about beforehand. That covers a very large area across southeast Queensland, and for the investment that was available at the time, it was too large of an area really to be able to effectively deliver what funding was available. So in partnership with the federal government and the state government and other stakeholders, we embarked on this effort to define these areas of regional koala significance, more colloquially known as ARCs. And essentially what they are refined areas of that habitat mapping, plus a number of other data layers to identify these priority investment areas for habitat restoration. And so they took into account, obviously, that habitat mapping, the remnant vegetation cover, so existing vegetation cover of mature vegetation, the size of land holdings in a given area and land holdings adjacent to those ones. So if there was large land holdings that were adjacent to other large land holdings, then those kinds of areas got prioritised. They also looked at corridor connectivity, so where there's existing habitat corridors that were already defined, like the Flinders Peak to Karawatha corridor, then that got noted in the analysis as well. You've heard a little bit about the blue gums tonight and the blue gum flats. That's obviously a key area, a highly valued area for koala habitat. So where those alluvial blue gum plains were present, they were also a part of that. And then also the feasibility of working in the landscape. So all of these biotic factors of where important habitat is, but also where can we feasibly deliver projects. And then these areas, they came out to be, there was 21 different areas across southeast Queensland, and then they got ranked against a cost-benefit analysis. And that brought out these 4 areas that you can see on the screen there. So from the top of the map there, the North Pine area, Lake Manchester at the west of Brisbane, and then Grantchester out on the west, and Flinders Peak just a little bit north of here, were the 4 highest ranked, and Flinders Peak was the highest ranked one out of all of those. And so we have been for the last 3 years delivering $1 million program out of the Flinders Peak area, and then for the last 2 years an additional $2 million across those 4 areas there. So to date we've delivered over $3 million worth of habitat improvement efforts across these ARCs. Those projects have all just come to an end in the last financial year, but fortunately we've been funded again by the federal government to continue the work through the Flinders Peak and Grantchester areas, and then as you see on the map there, through the farming and agricultural area across those alluvial floodplains in between those 2 core areas to try and improve the connectivity between those two key habitats. And so we've received another $1.2 million to continue that work, to expand on the work that we've successfully done through Flinders Peak and Grantchester to date, and also to find new opportunities to continue that work. So some of the things that we've got up to, that's a lot of money that we've spent over the last few years and that we'll continue to spend over the next at least 12 months. We've heard a lot tonight about a great variety of threats that koalas are facing, and invasive weed species are definitely right up there with them. So controlling these invasive plants to better facilitate koalas' movement through the landscape, like Rhonda said earlier, is a critical component of this work. And we've been able to deliver 450 hectares of weed control work across those areas to date, which is a really significant achievement, and it's made a massive impact for those areas. You can see in the images there on the left-hand side, there's a cleared area of forest where there was dense lantana, like you can see on the bottom image there, where it was an almost impenetrable kind of barrier for the koalas to move through, and there's existing vegetation there, viable trees for them to feed on, but it's also very, very difficult for them to move through that landscape. And so by removing the lantana there, either through herbicide use or in this case using a posi-track mulcher to mulch down that vegetation and then leaving the native vegetation that's interspersed in between behind, makes it much more accessible for those koalas in that area to access that habitat that's already there. And so we'll continue to do this through the new funding, and we'll aim to deliver another 70 hectares across those core habitat areas where weed threats continue to be a very significant threat. We've also installed wildlife-friendly fencing across 50 hectares, and this is targeted in areas where there's multiple land uses happening on a property, and people want to use some of their land for production. But if we can install some fencing to be able to manage grazing pressure in areas where there's existing koala habitat, like you can see in those images there, then that allows for the opportunity for that native revegetation to regenerate, expand potentially, and also ensure that there's the following on seedlings and germinating plants to ensure that forest that is there will continue to survive into the future. And so this is a really important aspect of it, and certainly a really valuable thing when working in agricultural communities, that it doesn't always have to be the koalas or your production, that there's ways that you can manage your land to make sure you can get benefits for both. So we'll continue to do this as well, and we'll aim to achieve that across another 20 hectares of area. Of course, managing fires are a massive thing for so many reasons, and koalas and other threatened species as well. So we've been able to address this threat in some areas as well by improving degraded fire trails on properties so that landholders are able to access them again. These images here are of a property that has an existing fire trail there, or I should say an old fire trail that got washed away in a flooding event, and they haven't had the means to reinstate that trail. And so through the funding, we were able to help them build that trail and put it back together so that now they can access a significant part of their property that they hadn't been able to access for a long time beforehand, and be able to get into that forested area there and manage that fire. And of course, planting trees. So where we've done the revegetation, we've targeted those high value areas, so those blue gum flats, whereas like Rhonda said, there's lots of nutrition and lots of food there along the floodplain areas that have been heavily disturbed since European settlement. And so targeting those areas to recreate habitat that's going to be high value, and of course reinstate critical connectivity. So you can see in that image below, there's lots of little dots in the paddock there. That's where all the trees have been planted, and then in the background there's existing habitat, and so attempting to connect up the little patches that remain across the landscape. And so we've already revegetated 13 hectares of koala habitat across the region through the programs already, and we'll set out for a much more ambitious goal of increasing that to over 70 hectares for the next stage of the project. And so working through that area in between the two priority areas of Grantchester and Flinders Peak will be really significant to improving the connectivity through that area. The critical thing really in achieving all of these things is working with the people that care for the land. And so connecting with the community is the centerpiece of all of this work. We wouldn't be able to do any of the work that we do without the people that are involved. And so we've delivered community workshops to share information about the threats to koalas and how landholders can support koala conservation on their land. So sharing information about what species to plant, how they can control weeds, that sort of thing. Connecting with the landholders, where we've actually delivered the on-ground works, has been amazing, and to connect with people who share that vision of having thriving local koalas is probably the best part of my job. And it really demonstrates that there's a lot of people out there that care, and that we can actually, when we work together, we can achieve something really great. And it's also been really valuable for this project for us as an organisation to connect with all levels of government. So state government and local governments have been really valuable contributors to this work that we've delivered, and obviously the funding coming from the federal government makes it all possible. And then other stakeholders like community groups and land care groups that we've been engaging with as well to make sure that we're all working together and working collaboratively to achieve great outcomes for the area. One last thing I'd like to touch on is just a couple of pretty exciting new developments, and you've heard a little bit about thermal imagery monitoring using drones, and so we're going to look at doing more koala monitoring in the areas that we've delivered work so far, and into the future, and that could look like using drone monitoring. It's emerging obviously as a pretty valuable survey method. And another exciting thing that Healthy Land and Water has developed in partnership with Queensland University of Technology is this Bayesian network tool, which is you can see the graphs down in the bottom corner there, which might not look like much, but what sits behind that is a big mass of data and statistics that essentially allow us to input different threats in a given area against koalas, and then that model will predict what the impact might be of local koalas if we manage those threats. And so that tool can potentially be a very powerful tool. It's still in a development phase at the moment, and so we need to continue to add real data into it to make sure the assumptions that are within the model actually make sense on the ground. But once that is achieved, then we'll have a powerful tool that can inform stakeholders of what threats that they should be prioritising in their given area. And obviously, like we've heard many times tonight, there's a whole raft of threats that koalas are facing, and so having a tool that can provide advice to suggest what things you should be focusing on to get the best return, and that return being potential numbers of koalas in the area that you're focusing on is really quite significant. So thanks again, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to come here and share all of what we've been doing as an organisation over the last few years and what we're embarking on for the future, and look forward to your questions a bit later on. Cheers.